who's
sorry.
been waiting, and then we'll come back
Thank
to the
you.
kitchen. Senator Lotham.
Thank you. That's appropriate. Same topic. What degree of public consultation was there? There's a 2.6 metre high fence proposed to be put right around the parliamentary building to prevent people from getting up onto the lawns. What, if any, public consultation occurred before that proposal got the green light?
There was no public consultation on that, Senator. The advice was the advice guiding the the perimeter security measures was a collaboration between AFP, ASIO, the Attorney General's Department of Finance, and DPS. It looked at a range of measures. The fences receive considerable attention, but there's a whole package of works contained in that. I might take the opportunity to place on record, it's not a fence right around the building. There are a number of fences at strategic points, and as the presiding officers have put on record, there is still there will be still substantial space particularly on the northern ramps for the public to walk up and down or roll down, and people will still be able to access the remaining part of the grass ramp areas by going through security screening and accessing the lifts to go onto the rooftop.
I'm sure rolling down the lawns was an important part of the original architect's vision for the building, but a part of the architect's vision of the building was that people would be able to walk up those lawns. It's, I hope you would agree, a fairly important and embedded part of the architectural vision for this building.
Look, we've taken that into account, and well over 10 years ago, access by walking completely over the building was restricted, and I can't recall complaints in the last 10 years about that. So access to the roof part, where people can actually stand over their parliamentarians and stand on the roof of Parliament House, still exists today exactly as it did before these modifications were mooted. So every member of the public can come in and be screened and go to the rooftop.
Security screening wasn't part of the original vision, with respect, President.
Well, the world has moved on since the original vision, Senator Ludlam, sadly.
The building was constructed in the late stages of the Cold War, when Australia was part of a nuclear standoff with the Soviet Union. Is the threat level really that different to justify this significant change to the way that the building functions?
Well, we act on advice from a variety of agencies, including ASIO, the Australian Federal Police, the Attorney General's Department and others. And the advice we take seriously. We examine the advice, we test the advice, and the position we've arrived at will keep Parliament House in a secure manner and allowing maximum access. And the access regime really will not change as it has been in the last 10 or 15 years.
How far down the ramps on the north face will the new fences be?
Well, how I describe it, this is not 100% accurate. How I describe it is we're encroaching a few hundred metres down, less than a few hundred metres down. Basically, a third of the ramps will still be accessible instead of 2/3.
So you'll be able to walk up 40 or 50 metres at the most?
I understand it'll be more than that. Senator, could I also place on record the fences that were put in 2005 were actually done with the design of the nominated architect, Romaldo Jurgala. So the architect of Parliament House was actually involved in the establishment of those fences that were put up in 2005.
You say that there wasn't a significant protest or outcry at the time. That was it was about the year that I arrived, started working in the building, so I can't recall that far back exactly was involved. But the Australian Institute of Architects has launched a petition to prevent that fence, this new fence, from being constructed. You're nodding, Mr. Stefanik, so I presume you're aware of that.
Yes, Senator. With the agreement of the presiding officers, I met with the Australian Architects Association because I was concerned about the misinformation in the public domain. It was starting to get a little bit out of control. In meeting with the association, I invited Hal Guider, who is one of the original design team and also a moral rights holder for Parliament House, and we were also joined by Pamela Berg, who was also a partner in the architectural firm that designed Parliament House, and she's also a moral rights holder. They both hold moral rights as representatives of Mr. Jurgala. So I had a phone hookup with the association. I came to Parliament House. I met with them, with Ms Berg by telephone, and Mr Guider in person because he lives in Canberra. We explained confidentially what was being planned and what we intended to achieve. Subsequent to that, the association wrote to all their members retracting the press statement, and they also withdrew the petition that they had placed on change.org. I did further request them to issue a press release also retracting the information publicly, but they have not yet done so.
I'm just going to check and see if the petition is still live, because it appears to be. While I go and do that, could you tell me whether one of the other things the Institute has called for is a release of the 5-year conservation management plan and design principles for the house? Maybe I shouldn't probably traverse what was discussed in that meeting, but is that something that you would consider releasing?
There is no finalised conservation management plan or design principles. There was a project to complete those documents. The first draft of those arrived on my desk shortly after I commenced with DPS in December 2015. As part of a normal process, which I instituted with the assistance of Dr. Herriot, we have, as a regular practice, we consult with the moral rights holders for advice. The feedback we received on those draft documents was quite disconcerting. It would appear that in developing the brief, my department hadn't consulted with Mr. Jurgala or the moral rights holders. And consequently, the documents that were prepared had some significant factual inaccuracies in them and required substantial amount of work to repair. I wrote to the consultants seeking their advice about making changes to the documents. One of the consultants obliged and made relevant changes to the document. The consultants to the conservation management plan disagreed with a lot of the feedback and refused to make those changes. So I felt that we were at an impasse, and given the resources that would be required to complete those documents, I decided to terminate by mutual agreement, I decided to terminate the contracts for both the CMP and the design principles. In its place, in July last year, I engaged Ms. Pamela Berg, who was the original author of the central reference document, which was discontinued some years ago, incomplete. I re-engaged her for the completion of that document as the, I guess what we would call the single source of authority of the design intent of Parliament House. That project has now started, and during the completion of various chapters we intend to prepare what we might call a management plan, which will eventually become a management plan for the Parliament, which will assist in that. So sorry that was a really long answer to your question, but it was important for you to understand the context.
I realised. Is that the document that will end up being tabled once it's been completed?
The current version of the central reference document exists. Is it on the internet?
It's on the internet.
It's on the internet, so it is publicly accessible.
The intranet.
On the intranet, my apologies. But as the document is updated, the intranet will be updated similarly.
Okay, but that's available to staff and MPs, so it's not a secret.
No, so anyone with an APH email address should be able to access.
Yeah, okay. Look, just finally from me, even in the time that I've been here, the security arrangements, when I first came to work here, we didn't have guys with automatic weapons out the front of the building. We didn't have the fences on the rooftop. This ministerial wing wasn't fortified in the degree that it is now. There were discussions for a while about a moat around the building. The security around this building only ever appears to go in one direction. Now, perhaps that's a reflection of the changing international environment or the security environment. But it appears that the design, original kind of design, the principles of this building, security is trumping those again and again and again, not all at once, but incrementally. Is there anything that, where do we draw the line? Are we going to end up in a building surrounded by razor wire?
Senator, you quite rightly pointed out the original brief for the construction of Parliament House was developed in the late 70s, and those certainly were different times to what we have now, and changes have been made progressively over time, as you've observed. Without going into detail, the changes that are proposed are intended to be scalable. It is my hope, I couldn't obviously speak for the long distant future, but certainly my analysis of the work we are doing would mean that we wouldn't have to be creating more invasive measures in the future.
Would
Would not. What we would be putting in place now should serve us, even if there was an escalation in the threat.
Thanks, Chair.